inside Lebanon, including an occupation that the Lebanese feel is illegal. But as to its holding, it's touch and go as it has been in the Middle East for the longest time. I mean, one can only hope that there will be that impetus for real peace, but a lot depends on the larger geopolitical context. What happens with Iran? Will the US be able to negotiate a permanent deal with them? In the absence of this, it's not likely they would see the real kind of lasting peace that we've been searching for many, many years.
Yeah. I think also, like, one of the things, as you were explaining that I realized is that currently this war is probably being fought a lot more to do with egos. Do you know what I mean? There's so many personalities, and with what's happening on social media, I think that that's also driving some of the irrational, perhaps, decisions that are being made.
Yeah, I mean, interesting choice of words. Certainly, I mean, with a president like Donald Trump at the helm of the world's, largest military force, and his character, and it's been the
Yeah.
subject of not just debate in American politics, but around the world. An interesting thing that happened overnight is we had France lead Paris talks, co-chairing with the United Kingdom, and about 40 countries were joining those talks online to kind of figure out a post-war deal to secure the Strait of Hormuz, but at the same time leaving out the key actors, Israel, the United States.
Sure.
Why? Because there's a feeling that you're dealing with personalities who are ready to throw out the baby and the bathwater, in a sense, to get their objectives met. And so it's showing that at least there's a section of the world that is saying, we're not comfortable with this kind of leadership, that there must be a relook at how world powers interact, even with smaller nations. So you're certainly right in saying that egos, I think, has a lot to do with what we've seen so far.
Now, still touching on the conflict that's happening in West Asia, many African countries have been hit in different ways. For you being in Kenya, what parts of the economy have you started to see any effects, if at all?
Certainly, we've seen it first in terms just of policy making and leaders. Last week we had in at least 3 African countries, Kenya, Tanzania, one more, I think in the south, having their energy chiefs fired because they were accused of profiteering from the situation. And then in this last week, we've had incredible fuel hikes, which is going to obviously impact inflation negatively. I mean, the Kenya government has tried to stabilize the situation with some interventions and VAT, but it's unlikely that it will make great impact. And I think the most concerning thing about this is Africa's reliance on imports of fuel, of fertilizer. Then you have a situation of the 3 horsemen of the apocalypse, if you like. First there's war, then, there goes the energy crisis, then famine, because, I know at least in Kenya, I was speaking to a senior government official 2 days ago, and they said, we're hopeful because we already have our fertilizer in for the next planting season, that we can sort of stabilize the situation. But what happens after that? Because we've just talked, as you've mentioned, about an uneasy peace. We're not sure if ceasefire will hold. And I think the point for Africans right now should be, why are we not taking, more advantage of the free continental trade agreement? We need to do business with each other. It's a survival issue. And again, speaking of egos, it should not be an ego issue between Africans. We're brothers, we're sisters, and within our own a continent, we have what it takes to produce these things and to sell them at a reasonable cost to fellow Africans. So that's the situation here.
I absolutely agree with you. Obviously, in every single crisis, there's always an opportunity. So I absolutely agree with you. African leaders and Africans in general, we need to look at the situation and realize that it's up to us to ensure that we don't get caught up in global politics, especially when it comes to food scarcity and so forth and fuel. Now, I wanted to touch on Pope Leo XIV's trip around Africa, his tour. Have you been following up on that? Like, what are your thoughts on it? And in terms of also some of the responses from, let me say, Western media, and why you think this tour is so significant at the moment?
Well, it's significant because of the ego issue once again. This Pope, right? This Pope is not the typical meek and mild pope. He's willing to go there on
Yeah.
geopolitical issues, and him being an American and coming to Africa first, and his first stop being a Muslim African country. He was in Algeria, now he's in Cameroon. I mean, that was a signal in itself that he wasn't willing to, you know, go out on this sort of divisive or just pure Christendom note. He's more of a reconciliatory pope, and in his visit in Cameroon, he's been talking a lot about peace and destabilization of nations. You will know that where he was yesterday, Bamina, I believe, there's been separatist conflict.
Yes,
And he's
yes.
been speaking out against the US president, albeit in the most pleasing way to the Lord, if you like. He's called out, and I want to get you a direct quote on this, saying, quote, the Pope saying, woe to those who manipulate religion and the very name of God
Sure.
for their own military, economic, and political gain. And that's one of the most stinging criticisms he's had of US President Donald Trump, who you will recall just a few days ago on social media posted himself as this sort of Christ-like figure, healing the sick, and that's been greeted, with quite some condemnation, at least across the Christian world, who feel that was as good as blasphemy. And they've been having this back and forth with the U.S. president, who says that the Pope is weak on crime, that he's terrible for foreign policy, and the Pope firing back, saying, you know what, you don't care about people. Your policies are not pro-life, hitting out on issues like immigration and the cuts on foreign aid. So it's interesting to see Africa become, the theater of this sort of global power play, with the Pope very much being keen to, highlight the plight of the poor, the plight of those who've lived in war and such.
Definitely. And it's such a pleasure to have you on the show, and love your insights and love your feedback on what's going on. Hopefully you'll be joining us again. Quick one. What have you had for breakfast? Just to throw it out there. Or are you not a breakfast girl?
I am not a breakfast girl. Can you believe? I can
Yeah.
hardly get a thing in until the work is done. So,
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well,
yeah.
enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Ritmos e cultura com Jacob Tivani.